It's a scenario that's become all too familiar as modern IT and critical infrastructure converges. The IT team has just discovered that a server in their trusted data center has been encrypted following a ransomware attack. As they plan their incident response, they also alert Doug, who is responsible for securing their operational technology. Is Doug ready, or is his company about to become the next headline?
Hello, what you just heard is a dramatic reenactment of what occurs almost seemingly daily across our critical infrastructure. Thank you for joining our podcast today as myself, Keith Walsh, Principal Solutions Architect with Armis, and Martin Crew, Senior Director of Solutions and Partner Technology Marketing, will bring a message to you today of how data-driven decisions in OT requires visibility as the foundational strategy to understanding the threats and risks posed to our critical infrastructure. When we talk about converged IT and converged OT, what we're talking about is the interworking of the two zones and the growing IT and OT attack surface that this poses. The convergence of this data is extremely valuable. It offers an endless amount of data to our managers, our executive staff. It supplies information around insurance compliance and safety management. It provides efficiencies and asset performance optimization to run the business more effectively and more competitively. But yet, oftentimes, it exposes our low-level industrial and medical devices to potential threats, vulnerabilities, and new vectors of attack. These attacks, their vectors, and their effects are all too common. As you just heard, as Doug walks into his lobby, he's come to understand that his counterparts in the information technology division of his organization has just had a critical server encrypted with ransomware. The problem that is faced by Doug is he then asks himself the question, well, what does that mean for OT? What does that mean for my healthcare environment, for my hospital? Are my servers under attack? And unfortunately, it's all too common. And as we look back across just even the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen a numerous amount of attacks on our industrial and our healthcare environments. The commonality that all these attacks and their threats and their vectors have in common is that they predominantly have all come from the IT side of the house. And these IT devices exposed to the internet are offering new vectors for adversaries to attack our critical infrastructure. So today we're going to talk about the foundational component of how to protect these critical infrastructure devices, which happens to be the discovery of all these devices. And when we talk about the discovery of these devices, we're talking about devices that are agented. We're talking about devices that are unagented or unmanaged devices. Devices like IP cameras and printers and badge swipes and card readers. We're talking about MRIs. We're talking about CAT scans. We're talking about operational technology devices like programmable logic controllers and sensors and actuators and HMIs and historians in the OT side. The importance of discovering all of these assets and taking them under management is previous. These devices have gone and fallen into a gap or a blind spot, so to speak. And once we discover all of these assets and take them under management, we're then able to identify risks, to identify gaps, to identify vulnerabilities and compliance of these devices across our enterprise. Those two things in and of themselves, the discovery of all communicating assets and the risk posture that they pose to our organization, are incredibly valuable in and of themselves. But the ability to automate enforcement through policy-driven action really brings it full circle. And the ability to do this agentless, without agents on these devices, and continuously and in real time, passively, is really the keys to the kingdom in taking these unagentable, unmanaged devices under management. So how do we accomplish this? How do we deploy a solution that is passive, that doesn't require agents, and doesn't actively scan our critical infrastructure to understand these risks and threats and vulnerabilities that they pose? Well, Armis is deployed in such a way that we can ingest all wired and wireless traffic as it crosses the enterprise. As you see here in this diagram, you see an Armis collector positioned in the middle of this graphic. To the left of it, you see there are several interconnections that Armis uses to ingest data. This data is ingested passively, real-time, and continuously from many different sources. The first source is a common span port on a core or a distribution level switch, where we're deployed passively and we're simply taking a copy of data into the Armis collector. Secondly, through an end user account on a wireless LAN controller, Armis is able to ingest wireless traffic in and around the airspace around our enterprise. Thirdly, Armis is able to ingest data from Gigamon. Armis comes across many healthcare and industrial environments where there are currently unmanaged switches, or a switch does not necessarily have open ports for Armis to ingest span traffic. So Gigamon taps and aggregators is a wonderful place for Armis to ingest data passively, in real time, and continuously as it's crossing the wired network. Armis then passes this data to the Armis device knowledge base, where Armis currently manages over 1 billion devices for our customers daily. We manage the discovery, the cataloging of these devices. We catalog the risk posture, the vulnerabilities, risks, and threats associated with these devices, and then interact, lastly, with the existing security infrastructure to actually take action upon policies that are triggered. For instance, triggering a firewall, triggering a NAC, triggering a scanning platform, feeding information to CMDBs, to SIMs and SOARs, in such a way that Armis, through data ingestion from switches, wireless LAN controllers, ingestion points such as Gigamon, can catalog and discover all devices, all applications, all activities, all IP connections as wired and wireless data cross the infrastructure, associate risks, threats, known vulnerabilities against those devices, and then to take action against potential threats and malware, as you heard Doug and his IT counterparts discuss earlier. So I'd like to pass it on to our Gigamon partners, and Martin specifically, to discuss the data point ingestion of Gigamon into Armis. Good morning, Martin.
Hey, Keith. Thank you very much for that introduction. It was great. Really enjoyed learning more about that. So for a couple of minutes, I'm just going to talk about how Gigamon helps organizations in this converged operational technology and IT world. So as we all know, and as this diagram shows, the amount of devices, the amount of applications, and the sources of the data underlying that's growing all the time. So when we think about OT, we have to think about data coming in from building management, from a variety of unmanaged devices. In a healthcare environment, specific medical devices. And then, of course, the ubiquitous mobile phones, tablets that everybody uses these days. So we have all these different data sources. They're communicating with various platforms. We're gone from the day of a data center or a virtualized environment. We're now in a world where most organizations have physical applications, physical data centers. They've some virtualized data centers and applications, and also increasingly they're in the cloud, and often not just one cloud, they're in multiple clouds. So with all of these different devices and environments to manage, you obviously have to have the appropriate tools. So on the right side of this slide, you see at an icon level, the firewalls, the application management devices, the security devices that you need. So you have this environment of convergence and increasingly complexity, and that has three real issues. So the first is performance. It's very, very difficult to ensure consistent performance across an entire network without the necessary visibility. Second is, again, with this complexity, you have the tendency towards having blind spots on the network. Maybe it's devices that haven't been detected. Maybe it's devices producing encrypted data you don't have visibility into. And then the final thing here is the visibility. You have to have this overall visibility to have an effective management environment. But how do you achieve this? So the way that Gigamon approaches this is we have a product called Hawk, which is our cloud visibility and analytics fabric. So the fabric, as its name suggests, weaves together all of these different elements. It creates essentially an abstraction layer. So you're physically breaking the linkage between these devices and the tools that are managing them. All of the information is routed through Gigamon and can be managed from a central console. It's not only managed, when we have access to this information in motion across the network, do four key things. The first, as Keith described, is we handle all of the access. So we actually grab hold of the information as it's moving. The second is that we aggregate that information together into a common platform so that we can see exactly what's happening. And then we apply intelligence to it. So we have a product called GigaSmart, and what that does is it lets us deduplicate traffic, it lets us filter traffic, it lets us slice, it lets us decrypt. So all the things that actually make the information useful to the tools that it's going on to. And then we provide the analytics. So we have built-in analytics within Gigamon, but more importantly, we power specific analytic applications that organizations need to ensure security and performance. So this can be a range of security tools, or it can be a specialist environment such as Armis. So what I'm going to do now is to hand back to Keith, and he's going to zoom in and discuss how Gigamon and Armis work together to achieve this level of visibility and security.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you so much. So let's go back to Doug for a moment. So as Doug walks into his lobby and he's having a conversation with his IT counterparts, the underlying problem is that there is potential ransomware and that has attacked one of the critical servers on the IT side of the house. And Doug isn't quite sure if that attack has converged into the OT side. So he's faced with the question of, what does this mean to me? What do I do now? Right? And that is traditionally what it boils down to when we're talking about critical infrastructure, whether it be healthcare, whether it be industrial control systems, and the greater OT side of the house. And for Doug to really glean the answer, what he really needs in place is the proper tools to ingest the data that is potentially crossing between the IT side of the house and the OT side of the house. And then he needs the tools that can actually thwart that potential attack as it's occurring. And that is where we've come to in this conversation. So we've deployed a solution with Armis and Gigamon. We are receiving ingested data into the Armis platform, whether it be through the Gigamon aggregators, span ports, or wireless LAN controllers. So what we now have is full visibility into the ICS or the critical infrastructure side of the house. Ideally, we've duplicated this infrastructure on the IT side of the house, so we have a full visibility into both the critical infrastructure side as well as the IT infrastructure side, which gives us full visibility into all devices, their activities, their connections, their risks, and their threats. At that point, Armis has cataloged all of this interaction between the two. Now it's time to take some action. So in this particular instance, I'm quite certain that Doug, on the critical infrastructure side of the house, is thinking, I hope my firewalls, I hope my segmentation, I hope my air gapping has certainly worked, because that's really the answer to my question, am I safe, am I secure or not? And having a tool like Armis, getting fed information from a tool like Gigamon, is the foundation to that question. And this is where now we talk about, well, it's one thing to understand and to discover these transactions and the potential risks and threats. It's another to take action. And here you see Armis's ability to interact with SIMs, sending alerts, interacting with CMDBs, interacting with firewalls and NACs to actually take action to protect the critical infrastructure sides of the house. So how would this actually work in practice? Well, here we have a day in the life of a device. As you can see on the far left, I've got a Gigamon solution in my infrastructure where Gigamon has gleaned this traffic off the wire and has fed it into the Armis collector. Armis receives this information and we do a full device discovery. In this particular instance, we're discovering an asset on the OT side of the house, but this could easily be an MRI, a CAT scan, or any critical infrastructure device. The foundation of the solution is properly discovering and cataloging all these devices, because this is where the gap resides. This is where the traditional gap has always been, which are these unmanaged devices. In this instance, again, it's a device on the OT side of the house. And we see everything from model and serial operating system. We see versions. We see module indexes. We know everything about these devices, all their risks, vulnerabilities, and threats that they pose to the organization. But even more importantly, we fully understand all the connections that are being made. We assess the risk of the device, what it is, as well as how it is acting. How it is acting includes things like those connections. Doug has a device on his OT side of the house. Is that device connecting to a device on the IT side of the house? Is that device behaving out of the known good of what it should be doing? We call this risk assessment. And it's done in a nature where all devices have risks associated with it, a risk profile that includes CVEs and ICS certs. It includes known vulnerabilities and risks. It also includes behavioral-based anomalies in how is this device communicating and acting on my network compared to how it used to communicate on my network? How is it communicating in relation to other like devices in my network? But even more importantly, how is this particular Rockwell device communicating across my network associated with Armis's other up to 1 billion devices, in this case, millions of other Rockwell PLCs? How is this device communicating against how those other known good devices are communicating? And we can simply associate a behavioral-based risk against that device's behavior. I then profile it, as I mentioned, and I give it a risk score. At that point in time, I can build policies around the behavior of that device. I can associate policy In Doug's case, with regards to all of his OT or all of his healthcare-based critical infrastructure devices, in what they can and can't connect to, I want to build a policy that calls out an abnormal instance or an anomaly. I can use policy to block those types of communications. I can use policy to block the use of unimproved protocols. I can use policy to block on unauthorized commands to these low-level devices. When a policy is triggered, a policy is executed. And as previously mentioned, Doug, in this particular instance, immediately would have policies that would be pre-built awaiting this type of activity in the IT side of the house, posing a risk to the OT side of the house, which might include stop that communication at the firewall, invoke my NAC, update my CMDB, send alerts to my SIMs, simply alert on the infrastructure, or trigger a scan of a newly found device as it plugs into the network. The end goal is to deliver safe devices, safe segments, safe zones, and safe infrastructure across not only our critical infrastructure, which includes our ICS and our manufacturing environments, our BMS and our DCS environments, but also our healthcare and our hospital-based environments. And it starts from proper identification on the front end of the process, which includes data ingestion points from partners like Gigamon, which leads us to the Gigamon and the Armis joint benefits. The visibility into all data in motion as it crosses our network across all environments is foundational in being able to protect our critical infrastructure. Eliminating the blind spots and bringing all of these devices under management is incredibly important. And our ability to optimize the ingestion of this data and their traffic flows will ensure that the delivery of mission critical data reaches its endpoint, deployed passively, deployed quickly and easily across any type of environment, be it IT, be it OT, or be it healthcare, assures that we can accelerate our time to value across any critical infrastructure environment that we find ourselves in. With that, I want to thank you for joining Martin and my podcast. For more information, please visit armis.com and gigamon.com. Thanks again for your time.